Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Land Matters, the podcast of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. I'm your host, Anthony Flint. Well, so much has changed since our last show, as we're all dealing with a new reality brought on by the coronavirus pandemic. Here at the Lincoln Institute, we've put in place the appropriate measures for nonprofit organizations, canceling in-person events, virtually all travel, having everyone work remotely. And it's been a challenge because bringing people together is a big part of what we do, but we're adapting like everyone else and getting better at using Zoom. Make no mistake, our work continues. Those are the words of Lincoln Institute President George Mac McCarthy, who's been managing all the organization's adjustments and transitions through the crisis. Our mission to improve quality of life through better land policy and help confront global challenges such as inequality and climate change is more important than ever, he says, in a statement on our website. That's at lincolninst.edu. In the coming weeks, we're set to learn what it takes to collaborate effectively, sustain productive partnerships, and serve practitioners on the ground with minimal face-to-face contact. Like many other organizations, McCarthy says, we're also looking for new ways to apply our research and expertise and to mobilize all our networks to address both the near-term and the long-term consequences of COVID-19. This global event is already having so many ripple effects on cities and land use and land policy. We're working with some of our partners, the American Planning Association, for example, and Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, bringing together the nation's top city planners from Seattle to Boston to talk about the challenges they're facing, what to do about approvals and timetables, how to conduct hearings online, and how to deter the now infamous Zoom bombing phenomenon. Of course, the more daunting challenges lie ahead. The very future of cities, their transit systems, everything they've done to promote affordable housing, and the fiscal crunch that is almost certainly coming, with vastly reduced revenues just at a time of increased expenditures to deal with the crisis. And we're beginning to see how alliances of cities and states might coordinate on a regional basis for the gradual reopening and recovery process. We're reviewing all our work to make this adjustment, but two things stand out that we hope might be especially useful. One is our work in exploratory scenario planning. That's a method for analyzing multiple pathways for how the future might unfold. Essentially, it allows planners and elected officials to make adjustments as they go, factoring in the incredible degree of uncertainty this crisis presents. We've established the Consortium for Scenario Planning to help planners and planning agencies across the country, and that's also on the Lincoln Institute website. The other work is underway at our Center for Community Investment in Washington, D.C., and that's what we'd like to zoom in on for this show. The Center for Community Investment was founded in 2017 to provide tools and support for communities to attract and leverage investments to achieve their environmental, social, and economic priorities. The CCI team helps foster multi-sector collaborations and ensures that community voices get heard and heeded. They've been focused on paving the way for more affordable housing, improving health outcomes, and building climate resiliency, among many other initiatives. And now they're helping underserved communities navigate the COVID-19 crisis, because the pandemic has brought so many inequities into sharp relief, and because the crisis is surely going to make all these efforts that much more complicated. How can places like Detroit get through this? Can looking at other recovery efforts from a past crisis, like the 2008 housing collapse and recession, become a guide? Or is the coronavirus truly novel in the challenges it has already started to present? Joining me, via Zoom, of course, are two leaders from the Center for Community Investment to talk about the pandemic and what it means for cities going forward. Marianne Urquia is a co-founder of the Center for Community Investment and serves as principal of Strategy Lift, a national consulting practice focused on coaching, strategy development, and large-scale community change. She's the lead faculty member for CCI's Fulcrum Fellowship. Sarita Scott is a program officer and leader of the Detroit team for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. She's responsible for providing leadership and oversight of the foundation's investments in Detroit. She was also a Fulcrum Fellow, which is a great training ground for future leaders in community development.
Marianne and Sarita, thanks so much for joining this conversation.
Good to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Marion, let's start with you with some sort of higher level observations, and then we'll drill down to talk about what's happening in Detroit. How would you describe, I know this is a tall order, but how would you describe just the way the coronavirus crisis is changing everything in the work that you do?
Well, I think it's been a series of shocks, whether people have been in shelter in place or waiting for government to put shelter in place orders. I think it's been a shock, and it's dramatically changed the way people work. Just the moving to virtual has both its technical and its adaptive challenges to it, but it's also reshuffled priorities and put folks in the work that we do in a position to have to respond to immediate needs and really work to stabilize the situation, meet immediate community needs around hunger and shelter and just general safety, and then really have to re-examine what these community investment organizations thought that they would be doing in the future, because with the coming and the emerging economic crisis, everything's changed. So the landscape has changed immediately in terms of safety and stability, and long-term in terms of economic viability.
So in terms of that near term, tell us about the COVID-19 triage tool that you've made widely available. How does that help communities in the near term, as well as, I imagine, in some ways, prepare for those longer term challenges? But how does that triage tool help communities manage this in the near term?
So what I noticed is that folks were, in a sense, flooded, both with what they needed to do that had not been on their plate before, the changes in what had been on their plate, and then the realization that many of the things that had been on the plate were not going to happen in the near term, midterm, or maybe at all. And so what I did was just develop a really simple tool that allows people to sort their work into 5 buckets: emerging priority, continuing priority, but with shift in implementation, pause, unknown, and let go. And the core of the tool is actually above the boxes, so to speak, and it's a guiding question. So many of us work with very structured plans and very structured goals or results or targets, and those aren't really helpful right now because so much is changing and so much is changing so fast. And what I noticed is people were, in a sense, like either completely clinging to their plans, like a lifeboat, or they were completely releasing their plans, and really you need to be somewhere in between. So what the tool does is it helps people set a course through a guiding question. What is it that they're holding in mind? What is it that they're ultimately trying to drive to? And then encourages them to, in a sense, sort their work and really literally triage down to what is the emergent priority and the immediate priorities, and then start to rethink their longer term work. And what I've seen is that it helps people, in a sense, get a handle on the situation and make smarter decisions about how to use their time. And folks are having to pivot pretty dramatically in real time. If you've been working on production of affordable housing or preservation of affordable housing, maybe all of a sudden you really need to be looking at protection of tenants in a way that you weren't doing so before. And there's a whole policy agenda and a whole kind of financial agenda that's emerging, but you can't let go of the larger work. You have to be doing the work in context, right? And so that you're working on short-term policy initiatives, eviction moratorium, for example, but doing it in a way that lays the groundwork for the longer-term agenda. And it's that kind of doubleness of both responding in the moment to what a community needs and laying groundwork for the longer-term recovery now is really important.
Now, it's all still shaking out, but clearly a number of new funding streams have opened up. A lot of the work that you do is sort of corralling all of that and making sure that the additional funds for this crisis really reach the ground and have the most impact. Is that going to be a big part of your days in the months ahead?
Already a big part of the days, yes. So we have this slogan, which we borrow from the larger world, which is that fortune favors the prepared. And I think that this really is a time to both resituate the work, but also prepare for what is to come and really work in alignment. And so we're seeing in different communities that folks are taking this time to both respond immediately, but start to think about what an aligned approach looks like to recovery. Because in order to really pull down state or federal or even philanthropic funds, you need a plan that matters And getting that plan that matters, that really is grounded in the emerging reality, I think is probably job 2 after stabilization and emergency response. And helping people kind of hold both tasks, I think, is the work of any of us who are doing coaching and facilitation and support of communities right now, because you really have to have a set of aligned priorities, and you have to start thinking about what it will take and what it will look like to implement these community investment agendas in this changed landscape.
Well, obviously, cities are confronting an awful lot as they confront this crisis. Got to think about the future of housing and affordable housing initiatives, redevelopment, transit systems. Everything's thrown into this new reality. Sarita, how is this crisis hitting Detroit? I think there was the impression that Detroit was maybe on the brink of a real rebound, and then this crisis hits. What's your view in terms of Detroit?
Well, I think most of us know or have at least heard by now that Detroit is one of the hardest hit cities in the country. And so this is on top of us already being a very challenged city with a lot of the things that you mentioned. And we recognize that we've been also combating a very high poverty rate. And so I think the word that Marianne used, shock, is really good. It's shocked all of us. Not only that, because we're so hard hit, there's always this saying that Detroit is like a small, big town. We're all very connected. And so I don't know one person who has not been impacted by this, either from being sick, from having lost a loved one or a colleague. And so it's been a very difficult time.
And some of the initiatives underway, whether it's land banking or monitoring the demolition and trading off with redevelopment, just in terms of housing and land use, what happens to all that? We take a pause and then get back to work, or how do you suppose it will pick up again over the next, say, 18 months?
So I think that's part of what's adding to what we have all acknowledged as kind of a collective trauma and collective grief. For those of us who have been doing this work of economic and community development in the city, this is a real setback. We were all at a moment of feeling that some things were kind of coming together, that we'd made some progress. We knew that we had still a lot of challenges, but there was a lot of synergy happening in the city. And so we haven't even assessed everything in terms of what the aftermath will be, what the conditions will look like, but there's so much changing every day that is just so concerning to us all. And you mentioned the land bank. It was just announced yesterday that the land bank is laying off a significant amount of staff. We know that our mayor announced last week a number of cuts that will have to be made. And so there's just a lot that we don't know yet, but we are certainly beginning to see a very disturbing picture about the future.
Well, all this work is hard enough before COVID-19. And imagine in terms of leadership and strategies, operating in this kind of crisis environment is just making all of that much more challenging.
Exactly. One of the things that's been beneficial for me, and so I've appreciated that CCI started really immediately providing convenings for those of us who had been Fulcrum Fellows. And so one of the early conversations that really resonated with me was Marianne kind of asking us to remember that we needed to be thinking about beyond just the emergency and the immediate. Before that moment, I really had not gotten there. And I think it was a real recognition of the fact that this has been a shock for all of us. This was so unexpected, it's unprecedented what we're dealing with. But in the work, those of us who are leaders in the work, we did need to get to this place of where we are thinking about what the future looked like and how do we start thinking about recovery. So we had kind of been stuck in a response mode. And so that was one of the ways that I used the triage tool. I was very excited. So when we received the tool, I sent it to some of my higher level colleagues and was happy that one of them actually initiated us all using it. It's always better if it comes from someone else. I'm still new in the organization. And so we used it for our entire planning for the state of Michigan. And I think, again, it was that moment, it was just helpful in us thinking and having something to organize all of our activities. As you know, so I'm at a foundation. We have activities for the year, and we've been asked to think about how has the crisis impacted our targets, our activities, what we said we were going to do, the work. And we really didn't know a way to think about that. And so we actually worked through each target and talked about it, discussed it in our 3 cities. What does that mean? You know, as an example, something, you know, having a target of supporting small businesses, to have the opportunity to step back and say, we will not be thinking about opening businesses. We're thinking about how we are supporting the existing business. Those small businesses that have opened in the past 5 years that are still right there on the cusp. Those are the kinds of things that we needed to start thinking about. And so it was great to have a tool to help us, and everyone thought it was extremely beneficial. And we're feeling a little, at least more comfortable that we have a plan. You know, what's 2021 going to look like, and how are we going to do the best that we can to support our grantees, to support the community?
Yeah, just picking up on that, what's 2021 going to look like? There's some emerging conversations about what life was like and how it was structured before the crisis, and how the recovery might be an opportunity to do a lot of things differently. Let me ask you both, and we'll start with you, Marian. Do you have a hope for using this challenge to address structural elements of our society and economy that was leading to a lot of inequities? In other words, that the crisis is just really revealed, or starkly revealed. Do you have some hope for some more fundamental restructuring of some kind?
I do, and I'm not sure if that's just sort of stubbornness or insight, but I do. And, you know, we're seeing people, for example, talking about the dangers of congregate settings for unhoused populations, for the homeless, and the need to create really deeply affordable housing so that folks are not in such potentially dangerous conditions. And those are conversations that many of us who are advocates have tried to push for decades, but now there's a responsiveness and kind of an appetite in the public sector. I think we're seeing the need for really just wages for the folks who have really been on the front lines, the folks in the service industry, the folks in food industries. So that, I think, is a very powerful and, I think, potent and feasible advocacy agenda. I think really understanding the ways in which economic inequities really create risk for not just the folks who are economically marginalized, but for everyone, really begins to open up the possibility for, I think, more just policy transitions. And really seizing this window is, I think, part of the triage. It is part of the preparation. So we need to be thinking about what are the kind of policy windows that we can really prop open and go through to kind of exploit the analogy, and be attending not just to work products, but really more social transformation at the same time. And I think that's going to be the challenge for all of us.
Sarita, if something was going to change in the future in terms of these socioeconomic inequities that have been revealed, do you have any hope for anything in particular?
I do. I'm an activist at heart, and I'm a Detroiter, so you can't remove that from me. And we're really hoping that this is a moment that we can lean into a lot of the areas of importance and the solutions that the community has been talking about for years here. A key one is water affordability. The water shutoffs became a big issue in this crisis because it was so important as a way to prevent, the virus from spreading. And it was really, again, the activists here that pushed to make that an issue. Things around, again, affordable housing, the foreclosure issues. So there are a lot of areas that we're feeling we will try to take this moment to really lean into it and remind people that had we been addressing some of these concerns, had we been responding to the way that the community said this is of importance, this is what we needed, that perhaps this crisis would have not, had the impact that it's been having. And certainly the things Marianne also mentioned around fair wages, that's an easy one, and it's been a long fight here.
I think also that, we have to, in a sense, be working to preserve core capacities, right? So in the example that Sarita was giving earlier around layoffs at the land bank, this is actually a moment not to retreat from things like the land bank, but to double up and really go all in, because we are going to see a lot of instability in the housing and real estate market. And those of us who are advocating for affordable housing and for equitable community development, we have to be prepared to take advantage of the opportunities and really have a way to acquire and hold land and buildings for future rebuilding. And so I think one of the things that communities have to do is really assess what are the core capacities that the community wants to preserve. We're going to see a lot of instability in the social sector. We're going to see a lot of closing of organizations and merger and acquisitions, et cetera, et cetera. But I think as communities, we have to think about what are the core capacities we want to preserve. We want to preserve the ability to acquire and hold land. We want to preserve the ability to distribute resources in a very fast and equitable way. We want to preserve the ability to plan. We want to preserve the ability to respond in emergencies. And those are the kinds of design and choice-making processes that we've got to get to, so that organizations aren't falling by the wayside just because, but that we're really making choices about what to keep and what to push forward. And recovery is going to be rough, and it's going to take a while, and we have to be kind of suited up for the long haul. And this is the moment to be making those choices and be standing with specific organizations that we know we're going to need over the next 2 to 3 years as we rebuild and reposition ourselves as communities.
Well, Mariana and Sarita, thank you for this conversation and being part of this all COVID-19 episode of the Land Matters podcast. We all have great appreciation and respect for all the work you do. All of us here at the Lincoln Institute wish only the best for cities now and in the future. Stay safe, and thanks for listening.